Roman, welcome back to Talk Python to me.
Hi. Hi.
Hey,
Good to
so
see you
good to have you
again.
back on the show. Yeah, you as well.
Thank
How
you.
have you been?
Thank you. So it was a nice adventure for me, like these 2 years of building
Mm-hmm.
Python projects, of moving to other countries. So yeah.
Yeah, are you up for sharing that with people? What you're up
Sorry?
to? Are you up for sharing where you've moved to? When last time we spoke, you were in Berlin, I
Yeah.
believe.
I was in
N-
Germany and
Yeah,
now
Nick
I'm in
Jetzt.
Costa Rica. So completely
Somewhere new.
different culture, completely different continent.
Yeah, are you enjoying your time there?
Yeah, so I like it so much. Honestly, I like Germany too. So Germany is a
Of
great
course.
country, but I like different things.
But yeah, but you're probably looking forward to not freezing cold winters.
I want to try, honestly. I don't know if I will like it or not, but I want to try it until just a few years, for example.
I moved to San Diego, California a long time ago, and was really I didn't really enjoy the fact that there was no winters and there was no fall. It was just always nice, always. Until one day I realized, you know what? We just headed out mountain biking in the mountains, and the weather was perfect, and it was February, and we didn't even check if it was gonna rain or be nice because it's always nice. You know what? That's a good trade off. You could do a lot of cool stuff when you live in a place like that. So I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that. You'll have to let us know how it goes.
It's,
And yeah, Beanie has been going really well as well, right? So when we first spoke, Beanie was just kind of a new project, and the thing that caught my eye about it was two really cool aspects: asynchronous and Pydantic. I'm like, oh, those things together plus MongoDB sound pretty awesome. And so it's been really fun to watch it grow over the last 2 years, and it's gaining quite a bit of popularity.
yeah, it's I don't know, it's kind of popular, but not that much as Pydantic itself, as fast API, but yeah, still popular in context of MongoDB for sure.
Sure,
And
absolutely. I think it's a little bit different than a web framework potentially, right? Like it's hard to say, is it as popular as Fast API or Flask or
yeah,
something like that, right? Because those things, those are the contexts in which this is used, but not everyone uses Mongo. Not everybody cares about async Mongo, all that, right? There's a lot of filters down, but I think you've done a really great job shepherding this project. I think you've been really responsive to people. I know I've seen the issues coming back and forth. I've seen lots of releases on it, and I
thank
guess the
you.
biggest news is around. Yeah, you're welcome. I think the biggest news is around when Pydantic 2 came out. That that kind of changed so many things. I spoke to Samuel Colvin about his plan there. I spoke to Sebastian Ramirez from Fast API about like what he was thinking and where that was going, and it sounded like it was, you know, not too much work for people using Pydantic, but quite a bit of work for people like you that was like deep inside of Pydantic. Yeah.
Yeah, so honestly, I have a Discord channel for support Beanie users, and there I was talking with other guys. Like probably, I'm sorry, but probably I will not support both versions in the same time. Maybe I will have two different branches of Beanie with V1 and V2 supporting. But finally, I made it, to in a single branch, and this was very challenging, honestly, because
Okay, interesting. I didn't
there are
realize you were going backwards in that maintainability there for the people who didn't want to move to Pydantic too.
uh, there are legacy stuff, and
Mm.
I must support new features for Pydantic V1 also, definitely, because it's maybe people want to move to Pydantic V2, but they could be stuck on other libraries that support only V1, for example, and it can
Mm.
it can go for a while, like months, and uh, and
Yeah.
even for me, it took like 3 weeks to make to make it work. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just so people know, TalkPython.fm and PythonBytes.fm. Both of those are based on MongoDB and Beanie. And when you came out with the new one, I saw when the release for V2 came out, I'm like, all right, how long until Beanie supports this? And I saw that you were like right on top of it and working on that was great. And then when I went to upgrade it, it was really easy, right? I use pip tools and I use pip compile to just get all the latest versions of the dependencies and update the requirements. So then it installed a new one and it wouldn't run because not because of anything that Beanie did, but just some changes to Pydantic 2. For example, if I had let's say there's a database field that was URL and it was an optional string. In Pydantic 1, you could say URL : optional bracket stir. That's it. But there's no default value explicitly set, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in Pydantic 2, that's not accepted, right? It says, no. If you want it to be none by default, you have to set it to be none explicitly. So I had to go through and like find all my database documents. And basically, anytime there's an optional something, set it equal to none. And then that was it. That was the upgrade process. And now the website runs faster. Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, I implemented a middleware, like a few classes and functions that just check if you use Pydantic V1 or Pydantic V2, and based on this, use a different kind of backends, but interface is the same for both. So I'm a unified interface inside of Beanie.
So before we get too far down this conversation, give us two quick bits of background information here. First of all, why MongoDB? There's a lot of excitement around things like MySQL, but especially Postgres, relational databases, MongoDB's document database. Give us the elevator pitch. Why do you like to work with Mongo?
Honestly, I like to work with all the databases. I'm a big databases fan and nerd, so I like them all. But yeah, MongoDB is a document database, and it means the schema, the data scheme, is much more flexible than in SQL databases, because in SQL you use tables, plain tables, while in MongoDB you use actual documents which could be nested, and the level of this nestedness could be really high. There are some trade-offs based on this. The relation system for plain tables could be implemented much simpler than for documents, because this flexi structure is hard to make nice relations. But I'd say it's much more useful for if you use nested data structures in your applications. It's much simpler to keep the same data structure in your database, and this makes all the processes of development much more easy and much more simple to understand them, I'd say.
Yeah.
So
you don't have the
I
so-called object relational impedance mismatch, where it's like, well, you break it all apart like this in the database and you reassemble it into an object hierarchy over here, and then you do it again in the other way, and like all that stuff. It's kind of just mirrored the same, right?
Yeah, true. And I really like MongoDB to make like small projects. I mean, when I just want to play with something, and I play with data structures a lot, and using Postgres or MySQL, I have to do a lot of migrations, because when I change the type of field or just number of fields, I have to do this stuff, and this is kind of annoying because I just want to make fun and to play.
Yes, exactly. For me, it's easy to make MongoDB fast, and it's operationally almost trivial, right? If I want to add a field to some collection, I just add it to the class and start using it, and it appears, it just shows up. And you want to add a nested object, you just add it, and you don't have to keep running migrations and having server downtime and all that. It's glorious. Okay, so that's the background for people maybe haven't done anything with Mongo. What about Beanie? Why? What is Beanie? Really quick for people, we talking about it a bit, but give us the quick rundown on Beanie and why you built it. Like there were
Yeah,
other things that talked to MongoDB and Python before.
yeah. So there are a lot of tools. There is Mongo Engine, which is nice and which is
Yeah, I like
official.
Mongo Engine too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But one day, so I was playing again with new technologies, and Fast API was super new that time. It was like you know, it wasn't that famous at that time, like 3 years ago. And already was super nice. And I wanted to play with it before I can use it in my production projects. And I found that there is no nice, let's say, connector to MongoDB from FastAPI because there is nothing that could support and Pydantic and asynchronous
Exactly. Yeah.
MongoDB driver motor. And I decided, like, but why? I think I can implement it myself. Why not? And I made a very small, tiny ODM, and I even thought it would be tiny all the time. Like it could support only models of the documents. It could insert them, and all the operations of MongoDB. It wasn't hidden inside of Beanie. You had to
Yeah.
use MQL, Mongo Query Language, there,
Mm.
like plain. And so I just released this. And somehow in 1 month it got not that popular, but people just came to me and like, I like what you did. Could you please add this feature and that feature? And this part works wrongly, so please fix this. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know, but I made an open source product. Wow,
Yeah, that's
nice.
cool. Some weird podcaster guy goes, "This is great, except for where are the indexes."
Yeah, this was like first or maybe second week after I published it, and yeah, you came to my to GitHub issues. Could you add
Yeah.
indexes? And I was like, I forgot about indexes. Yeah, I have to add them.
Yeah.
And
Indexes
I
are
add,
like database magic. They're just awesome.
yeah, true. So yeah, and this
Yeah.
was kind of playground project, and now this is nice ODM for
Yep.
MongoDB.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's been really reliable for all the work that we've been doing. So good work on that. Let's see. I guess there's two angles to go here. One, if we go over the releases, the big release is this 1.21.0, which says Pydantic V2 support. So I want to spend a lot of time talking to you about like what was your experience going from Pydantic 1 to 2, because as you said, there's the really famous ones like Fast API and others, but there's many projects out there that use Pydantic. I wonder if we could get it to show it. So GitHub has that feature where it shows used by 229,000 projects, 228,826
Nearly,
projects
nearly all the
just
projects use Pydantic now, right?
exactly just on GitHub use Pydantic. So many of them still haven't necessarily done this work to move to 2. And so I want to make that the focus of our conversation. However, since we had a nice episode on Beanie before we get into that aspect, let's just do a catch up on like what's happened with Beanie in the last 2 years. What are some of the cool new features and things that you want to highlight for folks?
Yeah. So I added a lot of features, honestly, but
Mm-hmm.
there were a few really big. I really like one. I didn't know that it could be needed for anybody, but I was continuously asked about please add this, and I didn't want to add, but finally I added, and now I love this so much. This called inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
You can inherit documents, so you can make a big inherited structure like car, then yeah, vehicle. Then from vehicle you can inherit bicycle, by car, and from car inherit something else.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it will it everything will be stored in the same collection, in the same MongoDB collection. And if you want to
Oh.
if you want to make statistics over all the types, you can do it. And when you need to operate only with a type or subtype, you can do it as well. And you can choose what you want to do. And I know this feature is used in productions now in many projects, and this is nice. This kind of
Yeah,
flexibility.
this is really cool. So when I first heard about it, my first impression was, okay, so instead of deriving from beanie.document, you create some class that has some common features, maybe properties and validation and stuff, and then other documents can derive from it. So, like you said, bicycle versus car. But in my mind, those would still go into different collections, right? They would go in different collections, and it would just be a simpler way to have the code that would have a significant bit of reuse. But the fact that they all go into the same collection and the documents are kind of supersets of each other, that's I think that's pretty interesting. I
Yeah,
hadn't
you
really
can.
thought
So
about how
this
I'd use that.
you can do even two different. Like you can if you want to count all the vehicles, you can do it without without making requests to each of the collections because everything in the
Hmm.
single collection. And you can do
Yeah.
this with different fields there as well. And you can make aggregations over all of them, and even over cars separately. So this is nice.
Oh,
And yeah, I
interesting.
like
Does the
that.
record have something, some kind of indicator of uh,
Yeah, inside there
what
is
class it is? It's like I'm a car class, I'm a bike class.
yeah, you can specify. Originally, it is called class name or something like this with underscore, but you can specify which field would work for this. So you can
Hmm.
specify the name of this field, and in this field, it stores not only the name of the class but the structure itself. Like for bus, it will keep vehicle, car, bus. Yeah, so in this
Yeah.
field.
Okay.
And that's
That
why it will be
looks
able to
interesting.
on the, even on the database level, it will understand the hierarchy of this object.
Right. And so if you want to do data sciencey things, you could use the aggregation framework to run a bunch of those types of queries on it, right?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
better to do all this stuff on the database layer because Python is not that fast with iterations, and
Hmm.
while MongoDB is super fast.
Yeah, and plus, you don't need necessarily to pull all the data back just
Yeah,
to read some field or whatever, right? So yeah, that's really cool. All right, this is not what I expected when I first heard about it, but this is quite cool.
yeah. This and I first time I heard this about this feature, I was like, nobody wants this. Why do you try to? But then I found how flexible this is getting to be, and so yeah, this is nice.
Yeah, I guess it leverage the reason I guess it's a surprise to me is it leverages an aspect of MongoDB that's in document databases in general that are interesting, but that I don't find myself using very much is in that you don't have to have there's not a real structured schema. And a lot of people say that and kind of get a sense for it. For me, that's always meant like, well, the database doesn't control the schema, but my code does, and that's probably going to be the same, right? So there's kind of an implicit static schema at any
Yeah,
given time that matches the code, but you can do things like put different records into the same collection. I mean, you wouldn't do it just like, well, here's a user and here's a blog post and just put them in the same collection. That would be insane. but there's, if you have this commonality of this base class, I can see why you might do this. It's interesting.
yeah. In this context, blog post or video post could be different by structure, but could be stored in the single collection. Then
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay. One other thing on the page here that we could maybe talk about is link. I want to tell people about what link is.
yeah. MongoDB is non-relational database, but you can force it to work with relations, and there is a data type in MongoDB called dbref, DB reference, which is used for to work with this link type in Beanie. So in Beanie, with this generic type link, you can put inside of the link any document type, and it can make relations based on this link. So you can fetch linked documents from another collections using just standard find operations in Beanie. Um, yeah, and there is kind of magic under the hood. I use instead of using find operations, MongoDB find operations, I use aggregation framework of MongoDB, but it is hidden under the hood of Beanie, and so yeah, and you can
Mhm.
use relations then. And the nice thing about new features, because link already was implemented, I think 2 years ago, but again was I don't come up with my own features. I think every feature somebody asked me for, and I
Yeah,
was asked for another feature to make backtracking, back references for these links. Like if you have a link from one document to another document should be able to have to fetch this relation backwards, and that's
I
how I
see. So in
implemented.
this case, you've got an owner which has a list of vehicles, but given a vehicle, you would like to ask who is its owner, right?
Yeah, true.
Okay.
And I implemented this. I named backlinks,
Okay.
backlink, and it can just fetch it in reverse direction.
That's
And
cool.
and the nice thing about this is it only uses the magic of aggregations, and it doesn't store anything for backlinks fields in the collection itself. Like in
Okay.
the MongoDB document, you never will find this field for backlink because everything you need is on the link, and
And
this is nice.
yeah, that is really cool. Um, and you in the queries in the find statement, you add fetch underscore link equals true, and that's kind of like a join. Is that how that works?
Yeah, yeah. When you there are
Like
options.
eager versus lazy loading type of thing.
Yeah, when you find without this option, by default it is false. You will see in the field in the linked field, you will see only link itself. It will be link with ID inside of the object. But if you put fetch, and you can fetch it manually, like with method dot fetch, it will work. But when you put fetch links true, it will fetch it everything automatically on the database layer, and yeah, it will return all the linked documents.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. Other one, lazy parsing. I mean, we all want to be lazy, but what are we doing here? What is this one?
Yeah, so this is uh, in some cases, Beanie could be used for really high load projects, and sometimes you need to fetch like thousands of documents
Hmm.
in a moment. And the nature of Pydantic is synchronous, not asynchronous, because it uses CPU-bound operations there. And when you fetch hundreds of documents, even thousands of documents, you completely block your system because a lot of loops to parse data, to validate data, and etc. And if you use it in asynchronous framework, this is not behavior that you would like to have. And to fix this
Maybe
problem,
even in a synchronous framework, it might be the behavior you don't want to have as well.
yeah,
Right? Even then, yeah, yeah.
this is true. But even
Because,
in
for example,
asynchronous, you don't
maybe
accept it.
yeah, exactly. But it's totally reasonable to think, well, I'm going to do a query against this document, and it's got some nested stuff. Maybe it's a big sort of complex one, but you really just want three fields in this case.
Yeah,
Now, you can use projections, right? Like that is the purpose of projections, but it limits the flexibility because you only have those fields that were projected, and in different situations, maybe you don't really know what parts you're going to use, right? And
you can
so
have a
this is a
complicated logic.
more, yeah, so this kind of lets the consumer of the query use only what they need, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so
Okay.
when you use this lazy parsing, um, Pydantic doesn't parse anything on the initial call. Like you receive everything
Hmm.
and store everything in a raw format in dictionaries, in Python dictionaries there. And when you call any field of the document, it just parses it using Pydantic tools to parse as Pydantic do it internally.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So is
this
this
is
lazy parse primarily implemented by Pydantic, or is this something you've done on top of Pydantic?
I implemented my own library for this. Like it's on top of Pydantic for sure, but it uses in Pydantic there are tools and different in V1 and V2. The name of this tool is different, but you can parse something into type, not into base model, but just into type. You can provide a type and the value to be parsed into this type, and it can parse it. So I use this, and additionally, I had to handle with all the validator stuffs because this is a very important part of Pydantic, and you have to be able to validate things. And with lazy parsing, if it sees that this is there are root validators, then it will validate it against any field. Or if there is a field-specific validator, it will validate it against the field if this field was called. So yeah, I had to do some magic with Pydantic there, but it especially with Pydantic V1, which was slower than V2, significantly slower. It was very helpful for people who have to fetch really big amounts of documents and to not block their pipeline in this step. So this is a nice feature also.
Yeah, I think this is a really nice feature. What's the harm in it? Like, does it make certain things slower if you're going to use every field, or, you know,
Yeah,
why
if
not
you
just turn this on all the time, right? That's my question.
if you yes, for sure. There are trade-offs. If you will use if you will use this all the time, it would be like around twice slower than just Pydantic validation. If you will use all the fields. If you will use just a few fields, it would be faster. But I didn't turn it on by default because in general case, when people just want to fetch 10, maybe 20 documents and use all the fields of them, it would be slower.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of what I expected, but yeah, if you've got a really complicated document and you only use a few fields here and there, then it seems like a real win. But if you're going to use everything anyway,
and especially for Pydantic V2, when all the validation happens on the Rust layer, but here I cannot do this because I cannot put the logic into the Rust layer because there is no Rust layer for Beanie. And if you will fetch all the fields of the documents using this lazy parsing, everything will happen on the Python layer instead of the Rust layer, and it would be as slow as V1, and so we will not see the benefits of V2.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's interesting even in the V1 version of Pydantic, but now with Pydantic 2 being roughly 22 times faster, that all of a sudden you want to let Pydantic do its thing if it can.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So speaking of Pydantic getting some speed up from Rust, is any part of Beanie some other runtime compilation story than pure Python? Is there like a Cython thing or a Numba or any of those?
No, the thing about the speed of Beanie is not about so as Pydantic is very CPU bound, all the stuff happens on the CPU layer, while Beanie uses mostly input-output operations because it interacts with the database. And for this, just default async await pattern of Python uses works the best, and all the time, if there are any delays, it's most likely about this interaction process between application and MongoDB. It could be network,
Sure.
it could be just delay from the query and etc. But not Beanie because Beanie doesn't compute anything. Honestly.
Yeah, Beanie doesn't do very much, I guess, right? It coordinates Motor, the asynchronous engine from MongoDB, and it coordinates Pydantic, and it kind of clicks those together using async and await and a nice query API that you put together. And so, right, it's more about letting motor be fast and letting Pydantic be fast and getting out of the way, I suppose.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. So yeah, Beanie is mostly about making some magic and convert Python syntax into MongoDB syntax. And
Using, yeah, thank you for that. That's really nice. It's super nice the way that the syntax works, right? The fact that you're able to use native operators, for example, right, to do the queries. I really like that.
yeah, it is. I don't like when somebody uses this in production applications. I mean, because it's hard to find problems. But when we are talking about libraries, this is really nice when it supports Python syntax. So that's why I decided
Right,
to implement
right.
it.
People shouldn't get too crazy with overloading their own operators. but as an API, it's really good. So for example, in this case, you have a sample document and it has a number. And so the query is sample.find, and then the argument is sample.number equal 10, right? Which is exactly the way you would do it in an if statement. You know, contrast that with other languages or other frameworks such as MongoEngine, which I used previously and is nice. But you would say sample.find and then just number underscore EQ equals 10, right? And you're like, I know what that means, but it's not speaking to me the same way as if I was just doing a raw database query or writing pure Python, right?
Yeah, it sounds like you have to learn another one language, right? To
Exactly.
interact
You've
with
got
that.
to, and like if you want to do a nested thing, it's a double underscore, it'd be like number double underscore item underscore EQ equals 10. You're like, oh my goodness. So yeah, that's kind of tricky. Yeah.
True, definitely true.
Cool. Okay, well, let's talk about this upgrading story for the 229,000 other folks out there who maybe haven't done this. So a while ago, back in 2022, almost exactly to the day a year ago, I had Samuel Colvin on to talk about the plan to move to Pydantic V2, why he did it. It was really interesting. So that's worth listening to if people want to learn more, as well as I had Sebastian Ramirez and Samuel Colvin on to talk about it live at PyCon, and that was fun too. So if people want background on like what is the story with Pydantic 2, they can check that out. But the big announcement was on June 30th, a couple months ago, I guess that's a month and a half ago, Pydantic V2 is here after just 1 year of hard work. So that was a huge project for the Pydantic folks, which they've done a great job on it. And I guess the big takeaway really is that Pydantic V2 is quite a bit faster. Maybe you could speak to that. And it's mostly, but not exactly the same because, as you already pointed out, the core of it is rewritten in Rust for performance reasons.
Yeah. So I've made a load test in Beanie. It is much faster when you talk about validation of the models itself, especially when you validate parse really nested and complicated models. Then it's much faster than Python, than V1 implementation. While with Beanie, you still can see significant performance upgrade, but not that much because with Beanie works with MongoDB, and there is this input-output operation, which is slow and which could not be upgraded by decreasing processing time. But yeah,
Sure.
when we are talking about simple documents, it's not that visible, like 10, sometimes 20% faster. But when we talk about nested documents, when there are nested dictionaries or nested lists of dictionaries, then it much faster. In my load test, it is twice faster, V2 against V1. And I was super impressed by this because I was expecting this that it would not be that faster than as Pydantic V2 itself because of this input-output operation. But yeah, this is crazy.
Right, because it's not just the parsing that Beanie does, right? Beanie sends the message over to Mongo. The network does some stuff. Mongo does its thing, sends it back, serialized as BSON, and then it's got to deserialize into objects somehow. And then the Pydantic part kicks in, right? Plus all the extra bits you've already talked about, right? So it can only affect that part. But I think your example here shows, standard computer science answer. It depends. Is it faster? It depends. I would guess the more complicated your document is, the bigger bonus you get, which you've already said, and the more documents you return. So if I return one record from the database that's got 5 fields, the amount of that processing that is Pydantic is small. But if I return 1,000 records and there's all that serialization, like the database is kind of done more or less the same amount of work. It's streamed the stuff back, but when it gets to Python, it's like, whoa, I've got a lot of stuff to validate and parse, and I suspect that also matters how many records are coming back.
Yeah, this
What do you
is
think?
true. That's why this affected this case for lazy parsing that was implemented for V1, and now it's not necessary for many cases, only for
Right.
very extreme high load currently.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. So what makes me smile from this is, the more Pydantic you use, the more awesome this upgrade to 2 becomes. And it's like I said, it's almost no work. Technically, I had to set all the optionals to be none. That's not a Beanie thing, that's a Pydantic thing, but it's not a big deal. So upgrading basically means all the parts of your all the frameworks you use that are built on Pydantic get faster. So for me, when I upgraded the website, it went about, 40% faster or something like that, which is a huge speed up for very little work. It's already really fast, right? If you go to, the podcast, you pull up an episode page, it's like 30 milliseconds. You go to the courses and you pull up a video to play. It's got, many queries it does, but it's probably 20 milliseconds. So now it's 15 milliseconds or 14 milliseconds. But still, to get that much of a speed up and do basically no work on my part, that's awesome. And I'm not using a framework like Fast API, where the other side of that story is also Pydantic. So if you're using Fast API in Beanie, which I think is probably a common combination, both the database side that gets you the Pydantic things is faster, and then the outbound and inbound processing that the API itself does is a lot faster because of Pydantic. And so you get this kind of multiplicative doubling of the speed on both ends, right?
Yeah, definitely this. Yeah, I think the numbers you just told about your website is like this time is only about this communication. I mean, how bits are
Yeah.
going from one computer to another. There is no computation there, probably.
Yeah, it's super, super impressive.
This is
You
so
hear people
fast.
say, well, Python is not fast enough. Like, that may be true for a few very rare, extremely high load situations, but I would bet it's fast enough for most people. If your website end to end processing is responding in 15 milliseconds, like, you've got other parts of your system like CDNs and amount of JavaScript you send to worry about, not your framework you chose, right?
True.
Pretty awesome. Because of indexes, also. Don't forget your indexes.
Yeah. Each time when I have any requests about my things are slow, and probably I have to switch Python to anything else. Usually the problem is about the data model, not about the processing, because people could store things a bit wrongly, a bit too nested or less nested than it should be, and etc. And yeah, indexes. Okay.
Or indexes, or you've done a query where you return 100 things of huge documents and you only want, like, say, the title and last updated, but you don't do a projection. And so you're sending way too much data. It's like select star instead of select title, comma, date, something like
Yeah,
that,
this is
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so
then
put together.
sometimes also works to make protection on the database layer, like to make some like to find maximum elements or minimum elements and to do this stuff on the database is better than in Python, because in Python you have to iterate over the objects to find things,
Right.
which is not that efficient. So we
You
just
got to
have
pull
to,
them all back, deserialize them, and validate them, and then iterate over them, rather than just let that happen on just the fields in the database. That's a good
yeah.
point. And maybe the query is just bad as well. Okay, so what was your experience? You know, they shipped a migration guide about the things that you've got to do. And if you look at the scroll bar here, the migration guide is large. I don't know how many pages. Let's see if I press print, if it'll tell me how many pages. No, sadly, it doesn't want to tell me how many pages it would print. But there are many pages here, I guess, if I were to print this out.
Kind of
So, so was this a daunting experience? How did it go for you?
it was very, so when I just switched pip install Pydantic V2
Or you're like, let's see if it just works. Come on.
and just run tests, and
Yeah.
everything was red. First it
Oh,
was like only one error, nothing can work. I don't run any tests, so one error.
yeah,
Then
yeah, yeah.
I handled it, and each test was red and everything. It was really interesting and challenging. Interesting because it's kind of really computer science problem sometimes there. Uh, so Pydantic moved a lot of logic to the Rust layer, and it got hidden for me as a user of Pydantic. For example, there is in Python there is thing called forward ref. It
Hmm.
it what is it? In when you have two classes in a single module, for example, and in one class you have field of type of the second class, and in the second class you have field of type of the first class. You cannot just put these names without any magic. You can make input from annotation, or you can just write it as a string instead of the class itself.
I
And
see.
yeah, and Python will understand it as a forward reference for another class. And Pydantic can resolve it and make it actual class finally in the base model. And in V1, this mechanism was implemented in Python, and I could use it, and I could use the results of this, while in Pydantic V2, everything is in the Rust layer, and when it updates this reference, it updates it inside of the Rust, and I cannot see the actual class finally. And I had to implement my own resolvers there. And there are a few stuff like this. Another one big change was
That does
about,
not sound easy.
yeah, I was like, so will I?
Oh no.
Am I gonna do this? The
Yes,
answer,
exactly. And it, you know, for people who maybe haven't played with this, it's really important because Pydantic and hence Beanie depends on the types, right? The parsing and the validation and all of those things. You have to know exactly what type a thing is, right? And so if you lose access to the forward reference resolution,
yeah,
that's going to be bad. Yeah,
yeah.
right.
For example, in links or in backward links, if you don't clearly understand which document is linked to this document, you cannot build a query for this.
Hmm.
So yeah, and I've made this resolver. I honestly I just was reading Pydantic V1 code and was how do I name it? I didn't copy paste, but I was using nearly the same algorithm. Uh, and another big feature was about how validation of the custom types happens. Yeah, and get Pydantic core schema. So everything is in the schema inside of the Rust layer now, and you can write instructions in Python, which would be imported to this Rust layer and would be called from there. That's why if the whole syntax of this completely changed completely, and that's why I was thinking like, but so how can I have two completely different syntaxes for the same thing inside of the same class? And And I was thinking like maybe I have to switch branches now and have Beanie V2 after Pydantic V2 and Beanie V1 and support all the new features in both versions. And it was like, oh no, it will be nightmare
You're
because
already
I
busy
already
with
have
one
Bonnet.
project. Do you want two projects?
Yeah, and I already have Bonnet, which is a synchronous version of Beanie,
Right.
which also would be split into two then, and I will have four projects, which is too crazy. And
Yeah,
I,
no
I cannot I
kidding.
cannot I cannot split myself. This is a problem. And yeah, finally, I found. I honestly I just went to fast API code and I was reading how they deal with this and like nice idea. I will do the same. Thank you guys. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the power of open source. you
Yeah, it
can you
is.
can read and learn.
I feel like Sebastian and Fast API are kind of examples for a lot of different projects and different people. People
Yeah,
look to them for kind of an example.
yeah, this is true. And so and finally, I solved all the problems. It took me to solve all the problems. It took me like maybe 1.5 weeks. But
Okay.
then I published beta version, and there were performance problems with beta version. There were some corner cases that I didn't catch, and community found them. And this is great also about open sourcing, because honestly, I would not be able to find all of these problems myself for this short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
I guess how much of this is at runtime, and how much of it? I guess it's all at runtime, but how much of this is startup versus kind of once the app is up and running? So you've got your Beanie init code where you pass the motor async client over and you pass the models, and it's got to like verify that they all click together correctly. They all have the settings that say what database they go to, and the indexes are set up correctly, and whatever else is in there, projections. And then once that gets processed, it kind of just knows it and runs. So how much of this stuff that you're talking about was kind of the setup, get things working, and how much of it is happening on every query, every insert?
Uh, so most of this was about runtime, of about every query and every
Hmm.
not even not even this way. Like how do I set up the document itself? How do I set up validators? Because I also have validators in the documents
Mm-hmm.
to make things simpler and the syntax changed, and etc. So yeah, there are, for example, the config. There was config nested class called config before in Pydantic V1, and now this is a field called model config,
Mm.
which is, you see, is completely different interface again, because this is not a class, this is just a field now. And I had to, and I was using and still use this config stuff, and I had to not only switch to the new syntax, but support config class if you use Pydantic V1. And that's why inside of my classes, I have conditions, like which field I want to define based of the version of Pydantic. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
most of the changes were about these setups of the documents and setups of the types, but you use it not on the initialization layer, but on the runtime. Yeah, with all these
Okay.
things.
You also talked about the performance story. Do you do any profiling or have any tools like that?
Uh, Honestly, I didn't. So there are P profile and other tools to do this stuff. I was measuring using just time start, time end,
Mm-hmm.
but I was doing this for different parts of the code just to see what's happening there and here. And honestly, it was when I faced a performance problem. This was because there are some methods in Pydantic V2 that they keep, but marked as deprecated. They keep from V1, and in some cases I just didn't switch it to the new versions. And this was the performance problem. And when I found all the places where I use deprecated methods, then everything went
I see.
very
You switch
fast.
it to the new, more intended one, and that's got
Yeah,
the fully optimized version or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, true. Because Beanie is working with a lot of internal things of Pydantic, and it uses this very heavily. And sometimes I just don't know that in this, I mean, don't remember that in this specific part there is something internal for Pydantic, and I use it also, and so I had to check everything. And Pydantic code base is big already, so it's hard to keep everything in mind.
Yeah, I feel like that's the challenge for people like you and Fast API and others. You have your code way deeper in the internals of Pydantic than people who just consume Fast API or consume Beanie like I do.
But this is very interesting. Like, I mean, this is a true computer science problem. Like when you have
Mm.
to swap interfaces and you don't even know where where all these interfaces are used, and you have to detect them. So yeah, this is
Yeah,
nice,
and
super interesting.
again, yeah, and again on your side, you've got to do that to adapt to the new Pydantic, but you've also got to present some kind of consistent, forward-looking view to people consuming Beanie, so they don't have to rewrite all their code too, right?
Yeah. So yeah, true. So and all the interfaces, all the I didn't change any Beanie interface when I was working with this. Like all the interfaces are still the same for Beanie, and nobody should change their code which uses Beanie. So I implemented kind of middleware between Pydantic and Beanie, and this middleware have static interfaces, and inside of this there are these conditions like if Pydantic V2, then and yeah, this kind of logic.
Yeah, nice. It's a pretty good question out of the audience from Maro on here. It says, other than getting the code to execute correctly, were there any gnarly parts you had to figure out to appease type checkers and linters and that kind of stuff?
Uh, so currently I use I don't remember any changes about about these things like MyPy and RAW. I use RAW for instead of Flake 8 currently.
Hmm.
Were very I yeah I didn't fix this stuff. Everything was okay with new
Yeah,
Pydantic. I think guys made a really great job about this to make everything work. Because yeah, I have auto checks about my pipe and about RAF, and everything went smoothly about this. So yeah,
honestly, I
this was
can't
surprising.
imagine being Samuel and team to have to rewrite Pydantic with such a major refactoring, realizing 250,000 other projects depend on this, and then people depend on those projects, and like, how are we going to do this without the world just completely breaking?
So yeah, I believe currently they have a Discord channel
Hmm.
also for Pydantic, and I see many people asking for help for and some questions about new syntax, but I see that it could be much more because so current syntax is very similar to the previous syntax, but it's completely rewritten, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, this is very impressive work.
Yeah, completely rewritten, a good part of it in another language,
Yeah, yeah,
broken into multiple modules, and still it seems to go pretty well. Yeah.
yeah,
Like I
and
said, the assumptions about the default values for optionals, that was the only thing that seemed to have caught me out.
yeah, and I think you can put in the config that you can have options like um, use the same logic as for V1, but you just have to mention it in the config now. But I don't remember honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a few other things that maybe I ran across, like, and honestly, I don't know why some of these changed. So you used to be able to just call .json on an object, and now it's model underscore dump underscore JSON.
I
Or
think
there was
this is
dict model dump, right?
everything is has prefix model currently in Pydantic, and I believe this is to not make conflicts with the user logic because when you
Yeah.
have your own suffix or prefix, then it's simpler for users to have their own methods. And I like this solution. This is really nice.
Yeah, I guess this is the other thing that I ran into is I have a few places I was calling .dict, I think.
Yeah,
It's okay.
yeah, for me as well. And I have like conditions.
I see. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, anything else you want to talk about the migration? Like, what's go okay for you, or any other thing you want to highlight about how it went?
Honestly, I think I mentioned everything, and yeah, it's went very smoothly thanks to Pydantic team, and yeah, I really like Pydantic V2. I still really like Pydantic V1 actually. I like both, but
Yeah.
these completely different libraries inside and very similar libraries regarding interfaces. So I really like
Yeah.
how it's made.
Yeah, it's not too often that you get that massive of a speed up of your code and you didn't have to do anything, right?
Yeah,
I was using this library and it was really right in the core of all the processing, and now it's a lot faster. So is my code.
true. So this is when you read the code, the Rust part of Pydantic, I started to read it just to learn, and this is really nice how it can interact with Python parts. I mean, I can write Rust itself, just logic. I even implemented a database in Rust, but how to do all this Python stuff inside of another language? So this is super impressive.
Yeah, it is super impressive. We'll get a little short on time here. Let's see what. I guess I'll give a shout out to this course I recently released, MongoDB with Async Python, which of course uses Beanie as well. And I created this course on Beanie 1.10 or something prior to the 1.21 that switches to Pydantic 2, and it's all Pydantic 1. And so I was always wondering, like, well, how tricky is it going to be to upgrade? And there was really either zero or very little changes. I think maybe the default values on optionals was also a thing I had to adjust on there. But if people want to learn all the stuff that we're talking about, just talkpython.fm, go to courses, check out the MongoDB async course. It's all about Beanie and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was reading this course also, and I can highly recommend it.
Thank you so much. One thing I do want to give a shout out to is I use Locus. Are you familiar with Locus? Locus.io? Yeah, what a cool project. So this lets you do really nice modeling of how users interact with your site using Python. And then what you get is, I don't know if there's any cool pictures that show up on here in terms of the graphs, but you get really nice graphs that show you real time about how many requests per second in different scenarios you get. And on this one, I'm pretty sure when I upgraded it to Pydantic 2 and ran it again, I'm trying to think of all the variations in here. There could be something that has changed that I wasn't aware of. Like maybe I recorded it on my M1 Mac Mini and then ran it again on my M2 Pro Mac Mini. So that could affect it by like a little bit as well, like 20%. But I think so using Beanie and Fast API and upgrading all those paths to Pydantic 2 and the respective Beanie and Fast API versions, I think it went 50% or double fast, 2 times as fast, 100% faster just by making that change. So that was pretty awesome.
So yeah, this is great. Yeah. I see this 50% also, and yeah.
Yeah, and all I did is I just reran pip tools to get the new versions of everything and reran the load tests, and look how much faster they are. And so that's a real cool example of kind of what I was talking about. So yeah, if people want to see all this stuff in action, check out the MongoDB with Async Python course. Cool. Well, Roman, thanks for coming on the show and updating us on Beanie, and especially giving us this look into your journey of migrating based on Pydantic 1 to 2. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. So before you get out of here, got a PyPI project library to recommend to people, something Besides, of course, Beanie and Pydantic, which are pretty awesome and obvious.
So for sure, Motor. I would recommend to
Yeah.
use Motor. This is kind of PyMongo, but asynchronous, and
Hmm.
yeah,
Integrates
this
with
is
async and await perfectly, which is real nice.
yeah. And if you want to do something more low level than Beanie, then you have to at least meet with Motor because this is really nice library, and even after that many years, it's still very actual. And what else? Honestly, I don't have anything in my mind. Currently, just
No,
identity.
that's yeah, Pydantic's good stuff. Awesome. Okay. I'll throw Locust out there for people. They can check out Locust. That's pretty cool. If you are going through the same process, you've got code built on Beanie or just Pydantic in general, and you want to see, how does my system respond before and after? Locust is like ridiculously easy to set up. Run it against your code, pip install upgrade, run it again, and just see what happens. I think that'll be a really good recommendation too. All right.
Yeah,
Well,
sounds great.
yeah. So final call to action. People want to get started with Beanie. Maybe people out there already using Beanie want to upgrade their code. What do you tell them?
So yeah, just pip install it. Everything would work fine. So just
Yeah,
try it. But at least
just
you
do an
have to
upgrade. Yeah,
double check everything. So please write tests.
absolutely.
And if something will go wrong, go to my Discord channel, and me or other people will answer your questions.
Sounds good. All right. Well, congrats on upgrading Beanie. You must be really happy to have it done.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. See you later.
See you.